The Atlanta Braves just made some major assistant coach changes. Rick Kranitz, Freddie Gonzalez, Tom Goodwin out. Jeremy Hefner, Antoan Richardson in. And that's a big deal. Let's talk about it. Yes, welcome on in to Braves Today for Thursday, November 6th. Your source for news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsey Crosby. You can follow me on social media at Crosby Baseball. You can follow the show on X, Braves_today. We have a Facebook page and Instagram as well. And you can find all of my written work, BravesToday.com. That's the Braves Today Substack, as this is both a podcast and a newsletter. We're proudly part of the Believe Podcast Network and presented to you by FanDuel. Tons of offers out there for new customers on FanDuel right now. NFL, NBA, NCAA football and basketball, NHL, all out there. I'm looking at the World Series odds. We've talked about who's going to win the World Series for 2026, but they even have individual matchups and the likelihood of those happening. Most likely matchup for the Braves, they say it'd be the Yankees. Braves versus Yankees plus 4,500. After that, Braves versus Astros plus 6,500. Braves versus Mariners plus 7,000. And then Braves versus Blue Jays or Red Sox plus 8,000. So if you're ready to give it a shot, FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app today. Okay, I want to talk about, we saw some transactions, right? We saw Chris Sale, Ozzie Albies, those options are getting picked up. Before we do all of that, though, the Braves announced on Wednesday afternoon that they had made some assistant coaching changes. So Freddie Gonzalez was told he's not coming back. He was actually called, apparently, by Alex Anthopoulos 10 minutes before the Walt Weiss news broke on Monday. So just, I don't know, hilarious timing. Out the door with him, Freddie Gonzalez, not coming back. Tom Goodwin, the first base coach, not coming back. And Rick Kranitz, the pitching coach, will not be back in 2025. The Braves announced some of the replacements for these guys. They are bringing in Antoan Richardson for first base, and they are bringing in Jeremy Hefner to be the pitching coach. And both of these things are big deals. Okay? Let's talk about who Hefner is, why, even though Rick Kranitz was a very good coach and did not deserve to lose his job, the opportunity to get Jeremy Hefner is a play to make the organization better. Let's talk about what Antoan Richardson does well. So, the thing about Jeremy Hefner is really short playing career, right? Drafted in 2007 out of college, and the Mets have done this a lot. They drafted him twice. They drafted him out of high school, he didn't sign. They drafted him out of junior college, he didn't sign. He goes to Oral Roberts, drafted by the Padres. Doesn't debut until 2012. Does that with the Mets. 50 MLB appearances with the Mets in 2012 and 13. 8-15, 4.65 ERA. Has Tommy John at the end of 2013. The Mets non-tender him, sign him to a minor league deal. He then needs another Tommy John procedure in late 2014. He spent a season in AAA with the Cardinals in 2016 and then just retired in 2017. Like January 2017. And like the minute he retires, he starts working for the Minnesota Twins as an advanced scout. He goes from an advanced scout to assistant pitching coach in 2 years. By the start of the 2019 season, and he retired before the 2017 season. By the start of the 2019 season, he's been promoted to assistant pitching coach. Does that for a year, becomes the pitching coach in New York after the 2019 season, and was there all the way, after 2019, and was there all the way through the end of this most recent season where he left. And he's a very good pitching coach, right? The 6 years he's there for the Mets, they had the 6th best ERA in that span. They had the 4th fewest hits allowed and 5th most strikeouts. He's still not even 40 years old. He's 39 years old. He's not even 40 yet. And the man has been coaching now for close to a decade. I really like, and I'm going to get to the Kranitz part, okay? I really like a lot of the things that Jeremy Hefner does. And if you watch this show a lot and you listen to me talk about pitching, you probably recognize a lot of this stuff. The first thing that I noticed about Jeremy Hefner, and I've appreciated for a while, is the kitchen sink approach. And he calls it the kitchen sink approach. He has guys throw multiple pitches. Your four-seam fastball isn't elite? Great. You're also going to throw a sinker and a cutter, right? We're going to teach you to learn more pitches. Remember what we did with Hurston Waldrop? His four-seam fastball was a dead zone fastball. You knew it was coming. He couldn't throw it in the zone because you'd crush it, so he got behind in the count and he couldn't use the splitter. They gave him a cutter. They gave him a sinker. All of a sudden, he can survive in the zone enough to get ahead in the count and splitter you to death. That is how Jeremy Hefner works. He wants you to throw 5 or 6 pitches, which is the direction baseball is going. A lot of the smart pitching people that I follow called 2025 the year of the pitch mix. That's the direction baseball's going. That's a thing that he is in favor of. The goal of adding those pitches, though, it's not adding pitches just to add pitches. It is his goal. The 3 things he's focusing on is strikeouts, walks, and quality of contact. He wants you to strike guys out. He doesn't want you to walk guys. And because you have all of these different pitches, you're usually, as long as you have good sequencing, which is a thing he works on, you're not going to give up a ton of hard contact. And the quote here from him that kind of explains this whole philosophy is, quote, hitting's hard, extremely hard. And then you've got to cover like 7 different pitches that are all really good. That feels like it's a really good plan for a pitcher to attack with. Like, that is what he does. His idea is, I'm going to give you multiple different weapons, and we're going to make sure hitters are never comfortable with what is coming next. And the fact that you can throw them for strikes, the fact that they don't know what's coming, even if it's a fastball count, they don't know which fastball it is, means you're going to do better on getting strikeouts. And if they do put it in the play, it's not going to be a hard hit ball, or it's less likely to be a hard hit ball. And the culture that he brought to the Mets, from the pitching perspective specifically, was one kind of based on curiosity. He loves data. He wants to know all of the data from your bullpen session, from what you're throwing, how the pitches moved, and all of that stuff. Because then, when he has the data, it's easier to see what you are already good at and how they can take advantage of that. And he was the key driver behind the Mets building that state-of-the-art pitching lab in Port St. Lucie, Florida. He's the one that was getting that built, hiring the people to run it. And that is one of the advantages that the Mets have had over some teams. When Atlanta non-tendered Griffin Canning last winter, you remember he was part of the return in the Jorge Soler deal with the Angels. The Braves non-tendered him. Part of the reason he signed with New York was because they had that pitching lab. And he was pitching really well, much better than his career norms in spring and when the season started, until he tore his Achilles and was out for the rest of the year. It's useful to make your players better. It's useful to get guys in the organization. Again, Griffin Canning could have gone anywhere, and he specifically chose New York because they had that lab. Atlanta, to my knowledge, does not have a full-fledged biomechanics pitching lab. Just like everybody else, they have some stuff in Northport, right? They have the pitching set up in Northport. To my knowledge, it's not a full-fledged biomechanics state-of-the-art lab. Maven Baseball Lab is in Metro Atlanta, and a lot of the Braves players go there. It's not owned by the Braves. That's a private facility that Matt Olson goes to, that Spencer Strider goes to, that Austin Riley goes to. To my knowledge, Atlanta does not have their own facility. Jeremy Hefner just got one built for the Mets. Maybe he's going to build one for the Braves. And in case you can't tell, I'm kind of excited about this. Let me tell you why, like the differences between Jeremy Hefner and Rick Kranitz. And why, yes, Kranitz is a good coach, and he didn't deserve to lose his job. But why, given where Atlanta is right now, Jeremy Hefner makes sense to bring on as the pitching coach. We'll do that next, right here on Braves Today. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Encase Cards, custom card manufacturer. They're absolutely fantastic what they do. You upload your source photos, right? This could be youth sports photos, makes a ton of sense, but it could be anything after that. Winners, losers, your fantasy football league or your fantasy baseball league, now that that's done. Wedding photos, school photos, whatever it might be. You give them all the pertinent information, if you want to do height, weight, the name, all of that. Their designers go in, they figure out a background, all the holographic options, just like the fancy trading cards you'd get from a lot of the other companies that are out there right now. They print it front and back on high quality cardstock, they slab it in a plastic case, and then they put a frame around that has a built-in stand so you can put it on your dresser, you can put it on your nightstand, wherever you want to display it. The website is ncasecards.com, ncasecards.com. Promo code Braves Today gets you 20% off. That's ncasecards, ncasecards.com. Promo code Braves Today. Welcome back to Braves Today. Lindsey Crosby. Let's talk about the difference in Rick Kranitz and Jeremy Hefner and why this move makes sense for Atlanta now based on where they are. Okay, so again, establishing right here up front, Rick Kranitz is not a bad coach. Spent 7 years in Atlanta, had a Cy Young winner in Chris Sale in 24, a Cy Young runner-up in Max Fried in 22, and a fourth place Cy Young finish in Spencer Strider in 2023. The Braves were top 10 in ERA in 4 of those 7 seasons, including leading all of baseball in 2024. Rick Kranitz is a good pitcher. I'm willing to bet that if Jeremy Hefner was not fired by the Mets, kind of scapegoated for all of their pitching injuries, Rick Kranitz would probably still be here now. The difference in how these guys work, though, okay? Kranitz is known for getting the most out of his major leaguers. He understands the art of pitching. He's good at getting these guys to have the confidence to attack opposing hitters. He's really good at the mental aspect of it. When to go do a mound visit, to calm a guy down, to push him a little harder, and all that stuff. A lot of his preparation is dependent on swing paths. Like, this is the hitter's natural swing. This is where he has holes in his swing. Let's develop an attack plan based off of that. Jeremy Hefner, by comparison, is known a little bit more for the off-the-field development. And whereas Rick Kranitz is very good at the art of pitching, Jeremy Hefner is good at the science of pitching. So understanding what a guy does well and what a guy doesn't do well, and finding ways to improve and develop them into better versions of themselves through bullpen sessions, off-season work, side sessions, all of that stuff. Helping guys learn new pitches, figuring out what would and wouldn't work for them based on their motor preferences. Like, Spencer Strider's going to love this guy because that's what Spencer Strider does. But if you look at Atlanta's rotation and how you're about to have a bunch of youngsters in there, it makes sense to have a guy who is more of a developer as your pitching coach. Like, next year, you're going to have Chris Sale, upper 30s. You're going to have Ronaldo Lopez at 32. After that, Spencer Strider's 27, Schwellenbach's 25, Waldrop's 24. We don't know who the addition's going to be this offseason. Trade, free agent, whatever. We don't know who that's going to be. Behind those guys, AJ Smith-Shawver, who's rehabbing from Tommy John, is 23. Bryce Elder is relatively old at this point, with 27. Didier Fuentes is 20. J.R. Ritchie's 22. Owen Murphy's 22. Lucas Braun's 24. Blake Burkhalter's 25. Like, it's a bunch of young guys. And guys who grew up with the data and understand the data. Again, Kranitz wasn't a bad pitching coach. The data just wasn't his thing. Do you remember when Chris Sale struggled earlier this year and he couldn't figure out what was going on? And it turns out there was some mechanical stuff. His arm angle had dropped, a couple different things. And he was doing like extra bullpen sessions and trying to figure out what it was. You know who was in the bullpen with an iPad figuring out what was wrong with Chris Sale? It wasn't Rick Kranitz. It was Spencer Schwellenbach and Grant Holmes. Those were the guys who were going through the data and figuring out how to fix Chris Sale. It was mostly Schwellenbach. Like Holmes said, it was mostly Schwellenbach. And Chris Sale had great things to say about Spencer Schwellenbach after that. Quote, he's a guy that can take some of the technology stuff and turn it into performance stuff. He doesn't get too lost in this. He doesn't get too lost in that. He knows how to blend them very well together. Chris Sale, and he's smarter than he lets on. Chris Sale likes to act like he's just a big dummy who goes up there and throws whatever you tell him to do. But Chris Sale was like, they came to me and said, hey, you're doing this and this and this and tried these things, and they figured it out. It wasn't Rick Kranitz that did that. It was Spencer Schwellenbach that did that. It was Grant Holmes that did that. And again, Rick Kranitz is a very good pitching coach. But when you have a bunch of young guys who grew up with the data and developed as high school players and college players and minor leaguers with the data, it makes sense to get a guy who is comfortable with that data. Not bad, just different. And I do really kind of appreciate, like, you can see how they're going younger with all of their coaches. Brian Snitker's 70 years old. Rick Kranitz was 67. Tom Goodwin was 57. Freddie Gonzalez was 61. Walt Weiss is 61. Jeremy Hefner is 39. Antoan Richardson is 42. And Antoan Richardson, holy cow, this is an amazing hire. So I talked a couple weeks ago, month and a half ago, whatever it may have been, about how the Braves were like the worst base running team in the league. And like per StatCast, they weren't actually 30th. They were like 26th or something. But they also just were not trying to steal bases. Like they were terrible at stealing bases. Antoan Richardson almost single-handedly made the Mets the best base running and stolen base team in the league. He is an exceptional first base coach. Fun fact, he debuted with the Atlanta Braves in 2011. He went 2 for 4 with a stolen base. He was really brought up to be a pinch runner. In his career, in the majors, he did not once get caught stealing. But Antoan Richardson's whole thing and why he is so good at first base is he has almost a supernatural ability to understand a pitcher and his delivery and his tendencies on when he's going to throw over and do all of that stuff. And because of that, the Mets profited, okay? When you look at on a team basis, a run value for runners stealing, the Mets were not only first in baseball at plus 17. The difference between the Mets and the number 2 Mariners, Cubs, and Rays, that difference was the same as number 2 to number 30. They were not only better at that by run value, they were 3 times better than any other team in the league. And they did it despite the fact that the Mets on average, were the slowest team in the league last year. They were slower than the Braves. They had exactly 3 everyday players who were above average on sprint speed for their position. Everybody else was below average. Juan Soto almost stole 40 bags, and he had very low speed. But they put up 55 net bases gained in the running game via stolen bases. Plus 55. And it all comes down to Antoan Richardson understanding what pitchers are doing on the mound to control the running game. I went back and watched a bunch of video of the Mets and Juan Soto trying to figure out how the heck he did this. And what I can tell when I pulled up StatCast data to verify this, your normal lead. So when a base runner takes a lead, you're gonna have a primary lead and a secondary lead. Okay? And the primary lead is where you are off of the bag when the pitcher begins their delivery. And the idea is you don't want to be too far off of the bag in case they turn and try to pick you off, you can get back to the bag. That's the primary lead. Mets players on their primary lead, this is all measurable via StatCast. Mets players were tied for 24th in the size of their primary lead. They were rather conservative in that regard. Secondary lead is the additional distance off the bag that you would take while the pitcher was in their throwing motion, to put it simply. And that is where Antoan Richardson shines. Because Antoan Richardson, better than anybody else in baseball, has the ability to read and understand when this pitcher is and is not going to throw to first base. And so many of New York's stolen bases they got massive secondary leads. There were some of these. Juan Soto's halfway to second base when the pitcher releases the ball. Halfway to second base. The average secondary lead for Mets players on stolen base attempts was 13.1 feet, and that was the best in all of baseball. Because of Antoan Richardson, they understood when they could take large leads. And because they took large leads, incredibly large secondary leads, they were able to make up for not having great speed. I watched Juan Soto come in walking into second base against Patrick Bailey, the best defensive catcher in baseball, on a stolen base attempt at second base. Patrick Bailey is the number 1 defensive catcher in all of baseball. He's best at framing. He's best at blocking. He's best at controlling the running game. And I watched Juan Soto's slow self walk into second base ahead of a throw from Patrick Bailey. Antoan Richardson is a savant when it comes to this. And Mets fans, or the Mets organization, scapegoated Jeremy Hefner. They had a lot of injuries in the rotation this year. He was the fall guy. They didn't want to lose Antoan Richardson. It was a contractual thing. He could not come to an agreement with the organization on money. The Mets, owned by billionaire Steve Cohen, who throw around all this money, got cheap on their first base coach. And Atlanta swooped in and paid him. And he's here now. And it is a massive, massive deal. Because like I said, the Braves were one of the worst base running teams in the league. And they barely even tried to steal. Because when they did, they weren't good at it. Now, they have arguably the best teacher of stolen bases in the game today. Massive deal. He understands the data. He understands the tendencies. He's done it before. He's so much more helpful than your average first base coach. Huge hire. 2 huge hires by the Braves. Again, Rick Kranitz wasn't bad. Jeremy Hefner is a better fit for where the organization is going the next few years. Antoan Richardson, amazing hire. And this all makes me feel a lot better about what Walt Weiss said about analytics, right? He said he wanted the data. And he said he wanted all of it possible and he'd figure out the best way to use it. They're bringing in 2 guys who are very comfortable with the data, including one in Jeremy Hefner, who is so committed to the data that he helped the Mets build a pitching lab to collect more data. Don't want to speak for you guys. I feel very, very confident in this. I feel a lot more confident after these hires and after listening to Walt Weiss talk than I did when the team initially announced the hire of Walt Weiss. Obviously, we still have more coaches spots to fill. We still need to fill third base. Freddie Gonzalez is not coming back. We need to fill a bench coach. Let's talk about some of the other news that we got, whether it was about Chipper potentially joining as a hitting coach, some of the option decisions. We'll do all that next, right here on Braves Today. Final segment of Braves Today, Lindsey Crosby. On the coaching thing. Chipper Jones went on 680 The Fan after the Walt Weiss press conference. He is not going to be an in-uniform coach for the Braves this year. But he did talk about he is going to be more involved and more active than he was. He deliberately took a step back in 2024 because he wanted Tim Hires to get comfortable. He didn't want to overshadow what Tim Hires was trying to do. But they feel they feel the same way about a lot of stuff. They work well together. And Chipper is going to do more this year than he did last year, including making sure every player has his direct contact information, being available at the ballpark more often than he has been, like available for coaching stuff, not just in the stands watching the game. So Chipper Jones is going to be more involved, but he's not going to be a uniformed coach. So I thought that was interesting. Just kind of one of those things where, okay, that makes sense. But I'm glad to get his input more often and have more access to him. Because you'll remember we talked about this when Michael Harris went on that heater with the mechanical changes. Tim Hires had been trying to get him to make those mechanical changes since early in the year. And they finally clicked for Michael Harris when Chipper Jones came in and said the same thing that Tim Hires said, but in a different way. And that's when they clicked for Michael, oh, I need to do this. And it worked. And he went on a heater before he then started struggling late in the year. Talking about some of the option decisions and things like that were made. The Braves news was leaked. None of this is official from the Braves yet, but like from the organization. But the news leaked that they are picking up the $18 million club option on Chris Sale. That's completely obvious. Like we knew it was going to happen. I think it was John Heyman of MLB Network and Bleacher Report that reported that first. But they are picking up the Chris Sale option. I still think you may see Chris Sale get some sort of extension done this winter. Chris Sale feels like the kind of guy, every time we've talked to him, he likes it here. He wants to stay here. He doesn't want to move his family. It feels like he's a candidate to do one of those, we'll sign you to a 2-year deal with a club option on the end. And every, whatever cadence, or or we'll sign you to a 1 year with a club option. And later in the year, if you're feeling good and you feel like you're good to do this, we'll tear it up and do a new one. We'll guarantee the next year instead of the club option and tack a club option on the end of that. Kind of feels like that's where we're going with Chris Sale. I don't know if that is for sure going to happen or when they're going to announce it, but it feels like that's where we're headed. And I think that's the best thing for all parties. Because Chris Sale clearly likes being here. He's talked about the fact that he enjoys the clubhouse. He enjoys the organization. He doesn't want to leave. So let's go ahead and make that official rather than him playing on the option year with no control in 2027. They also, AA said on 680 The Fan on Tuesday that they were picking up the Ozzy Albies option. So we kind of expected this, right? $7 million club option. The buyout would have been $4 million. And so $3 million difference. They're picking it up, clearly. We talked about payroll yesterday. There's a fun little adjustment now that you'll see on the CBT when they're calculating the luxury tax for a contract. If a guy has a buyout, it's like you pick up the club option or the player option, or you pay the buyout. Then when you do all of the luxury tax calculations, you factor the buyout in to the annual value. When you're doing the AAV calculation, the average annual value, you factor the amount of the buyout into it. So the fact that they picked up the option and are not paying him that $4 million buyout means the Braves will actually get a $4 million credit for an unpaid buyout on the 2026 luxury tax. They're still spending $7 million in cash on Ozzy, but this actually helps the luxury tax calculation a little bit because they had paid $2 million in luxury tax, or they had $2 million in two different years put onto the AAV for his buyout that they didn't pay. So they get a credit back. It's just a little accounting thing. Nobody really cares but like me and Ethan Houlihan. Like, that's it. But it's there, and I just wanted to talk about it because I'm kind of impressed that I even know that in the first place. We did get also some news on Joe Jimenez, right? Joe Jimenez, $9 million salary this year. He had a setback. They're going to reevaluate in like December or January to see if he's going to pitch in 2026. Nightmare scenario of having to pay Joe Jimenez $9 million in 26 to not pitch when you're already paying Aaron Bummer $9.5 million to not pitch well. Again, I like Aaron Bummer. I make the jokes about Aaron Bummer. I like Aaron Bummer. Part of the issue I have is it just doesn't seem to translate correctly. The Braves had some of the best infield defense in all of baseball last year, and he still significantly underperformed his field and independent pitching with Atlanta. And it's like, at what point are we going to get the results commiserate with the inputs that he's giving you? And at $9.5 million, I really hope that Walt Weiss is more willing to use him in high leverage moments because the inputs are there. You're just not getting the results. And when you look at Aaron Bummer's stats for last year, a lot of his ERA, he had like a 3.81 ERA. A lot of that is driven by him making 2 starts and getting blown up in those. 4 1/3 innings, 6 runs on 6 hits with 3 home runs. Outside of those 2 starts, he made 40 other appearances, didn't allow a single home run, and had an ERA of 3. 17 earned runs in 50 innings with 16 walks to 45 strikeouts. And again, 0 home runs in those 40 relief starts. It was those 2 starts where he faced a combined 21 batters that he got blasted. And a lot of those, he got blasted later in the outing because he's not made to go more than an inning or 2. That's about all he really does. His ERA in the second inning is a 13.50. His ERA in the third inning is a 20.25. He was fine in the first inning on both of those starts. It was the second and the third where he got. And if you go back and you look at what he did later on in the game, 6th inning, he was good. 5th inning, he was good. Like, when they called on him, he wasn't bad. It was just when he was asked to do 3 innings in a start, he'd get blown up late. So it's still a lot of money. And I do wonder if maybe the Braves don't pick up one of these reliever options. Pierce Johnson's $7 million. Tyler Kinley's $5.5. And part of me wonders if you don't have Jimenez, and he's $9 million, and you're having to carry $9.5 million for Aaron Bummer, rather than also picking up Pierce Johnson and Tyler Kinley, do they not pick up one of those guys, hoping they can replace him with somebody like a Deizabal Hernandez, Joe Payamp, somebody out of the minor leagues, and then use the savings on the other one to go towards a closer? Because if you don't have Joe Jimenez and Ronaldo Lopez is in the rotation, which AA said they haven't talked about him being in the bullpen, he's throwing well, the velocity's there, they're thinking of him as a starter, then you almost have to go sign 2 relievers. And if you sign 2 relievers, it just feels odd to think, well, Jimenez is 9, and you're not going to have him. And then paying 7 for Pierce Johnson, 9.5 for Bummer, 5.5 for Kinley. And I believe Dylan Lee's arbitration is like $2 million. Not a big deal there. But then also paying for 2 more relievers at market prices after that feels like it's not a great plan. So I'm really curious to see what they do. We will find out today. The team has until 5 o'clock today to make the announcement, or to officially decide on both Pierce Johnson and Tyler Kinley. Knowing my luck, they've probably already made that announcement by the time this show goes live. So if I'm talking about this and you already know the answer, give me kudos if I'm right and just ignore it if I'm wrong, okay? Free agency's here, right? Free agency starts 5 o'clock today. I'm excited to see. We usually don't get a lot of quick signings. There's a couple signings kind of early. The thing about Alex Anthopoulos, and think about every offseason, he likes to strike kind of early on stuff. Ronaldo Lopez was a very early signing. Re-signing Joe Jimenez and Pierce Johnson was a very early signing. He likes to strike early on a guy that he has targeted as his guy. The guy that one of the main ads he wants to make, he likes to strike early. Last year, they supposedly were working on things and medicals fell through, right? So they did not have that early signing last year, although they did do a couple extensions. I believe that was Lopez and Bummer both got extended with some money moving around a little bit. So curious to see, do we get any transactions by the Braves before the weekend other than these options and clearing at least one more spot to take your guys off the 60-day IL? We'll find out all of that stuff. If there's anything significant out of that, we'll cover it in tomorrow's show. In the meantime, do me a favor. If you're listening on audio, 5-star review would be fantastic. Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell. You never know when we're going to go live for a live show because some news broke. Drop a short because something big happened. Bonus episodes, whatever it might be. Until next time, this has been Braves Today.